Order, order. So, thank you very much to our witnesses for coming in front of us today. This is our last session on the report we're doing on asylum accommodation and the contractual arrangements. So we're not looking at the policy, but we're looking at the way that the contracts are run and the value for money for the taxpayer. I'm very pleased to have Migrant Help with us today. I wonder perhaps if you could introduce yourselves, Dr. Caroline.
Thank you. I'm Caroline O'Connor. I'm the Chief Exec of Migrant Help.
And hi, I'm Juliet Halstead, Deputy Director of Asylum Services.
Thank you very much. We've not got many questions, but there's a few things we do want to cover, and we are very grateful for you coming in. I know this is unusual. We have witnesses after the Minister, but we know there are extenuating circumstances, and we're very grateful that you're here. So we're going to start with Chris Murray.
Thank you very much, and can I just draw the committee's attention to my declaration of interest and the support my office receives from RAMP. So thank you very much for coming in. The contract was set up in 2019, and obviously a lot of things happened in the interim that were not anticipated. I wonder, could you talk about how Migrant Help encountered those challenges, what those challenges were, how you encountered them, and the impact that it had on your service delivery and how you adjusted?
Happy to. I'll start, and Juliet will probably pick up on things. The biggest initial change was COVID. And quite unexpectedly and early in the contract, people stopped moving through the system. There were still arrivals in the system. Because we support people when they first arrive in initial accommodation and then they have access to the home line, that increasingly inflated the numbers of calls that came into the home line, helpline, but it also created a different nature to the calls. So they would call to tell us the boiler was broken or there was a heating problem, and they started calling to tell us they had a scratchy throat and what should they do and how did they isolate. And then people were shifted to hotels, and there was an increasing use of hotels, and there was confusion around how they could move in hotels and what help they could get. So we became a more welfare support organisation, not just a transactional organisation taking issue reports and processing forms. We always had an aspect of that, but the proportion of calls greatly outnumbered. We also saw a lot of calls that weren't technically covered in our contract, and we get paid for issues reported or advice and guidance given. We don't get paid if something doesn't fit a narrow criteria. So our charitable work within the calls increased to about 20% of the calls that we receive no funding for. Post-COVID, there were relaxations in restrictions around COVID, so increases in movements, but the hotel use didn't decline and continued to increase. So we saw total volume increase, more than double the cap on the ASK contracts in the early days of the pandemic and the early days of the contract. And we saw each year increasing call volumes to the call centre. Once people got used to calling us, the call volumes increased, and the volumes far exceed even the highest model given to us by about 7-fold. We scaled up staffing throughout that time, but keeping pace with it was very difficult. The political climate also shifted slightly, and there was attention to changes in legislation like NABA, like the Illegal Migration Act, that we were being told there was potential that people would become inadmissible, asylum numbers would drop, there was accelerated decision making, and that would affect the numbers in the system. So we had to make judgment calls about whether or not we should recruit for the numbers we were seeing, or they would drop off a cliff quite quickly. So managing in that climate was very difficult. You'll be aware there were a large number inadmissible in around June last year, where they had stopped all decision making. So it created quite a large backlog of people that we were dealing with that we couldn't do any more than answer the phone and help with. And that created its own welfare crisis for people and mental health issues and greater difficulties. And they call us because that's who they know to call. So we continue to support people throughout. Our numbers are still exceedingly high, and the number in the system is still quite high despite the drop in volumes. So we have been trying to mitigate that with some strategic projects. As a charity, we can put our resources back into the work. So we have a mental health project, we have mum and baby projects to try and mitigate some of those effects.
Okay, thank you very much. What we're talking about here is possibly one of the most vulnerable groups that you can get. You know, these are people who are really far from home in an unfamiliar environment. Potentially, a lot of them are proven to be refugees fleeing violence. Are you confident that you're scaling up, provided the necessary services for these very vulnerable people, or do you think some balls would have been dropped?
I think some balls were dropped. We didn't scale up as fast as we would have liked, and it was very difficult to scale up at that pace in the middle of the pandemic and to train new people to be competent and to deal with people with the expertise and the speed needed to. So we grew from 28 advisors.
Yeah, in 2019, a total of our staff was 156, and we're now at 298, and we've also got around 400 in our supply chain. So certainly our first response centre, the helplines, where I know, there has been a lot of challenge around wait times on those call lines. You know, we are now up to 337 staff in that environment when it was, far less than that when the contract started. So I think we have adjusted and we have adapted. We are certainly, I think one of the challenges we've had around the call line specifically is that we're a charity. We want to support the client that's in front of us, and we want to provide a really quality service to that individual, and that often means we're on the phone much longer than we would necessarily forecast. We are raising hundreds of safeguarding incidents every month to support those clients, to work with the accommodation providers, and I think we really focus on the quality of our service rather than some of the measures that we're measured against, which are quite quantitative.
Okay, but the quantitative measures you do miss quite frequently. So your KPI data was inadequate in 2021, 2022, consistently failing to answer phone calls within contractual timeframes, even when they're relaxed. Do you accept that on the quantitative measures you're failing?
On the call wait time quantitative measure, yes, we are. Overall, we are achieving 76% of the KPIs. We absolutely want to do better than that, need to do better than that. But it is worth noting in the earlier evidence there was discussion about changes to KPIs. We have had very few, and the phone line KPI has not changed.
We've got some questions on KPIs coming up.
And so sorry. And then my final question is, so the value of the contract over the course of it, 'cause one of the things we're looking at here is the asylum costs have gone up hugely over the course of these contracts. To £2 million a day it costs the taxpayer. So the value of your contract has gone from 229 million to 385 million, I think, which is 41%. So how has this additional investment from the Home Office allowed you to respond to the increase in demand? Has it been sufficient?
The additional funding has been sufficient to employ additional advisors. Our management fee hasn't changed. It's been indexed year on year, but the management fee is supervisory and management for the additional staff, and that hasn't been renegotiated or changed at all. So we are using more of the variable costs to fund that. So
what's the management fee? Sorry, talk me through that.
Within the contract, there's an element that is a set amount each month, and that is only changed by indexation regardless of the number of people in the system or transactions you undertake. The variable cost is for issues reported, advice and guidance given, an ASF and induction raised. So there's two elements to the contract. So when the volume shot through the roof, the variable costs increased, but the management fee didn't.
Okay.
And I think I would just add that we have invested a huge amount. I think, when we took on the contract in 2019, there was just under 50,000 asylum seekers in the system. We're now, if you include all of the sort of contingency accommodation, just under 105,000. And the database that we built at that time has been creaking at the seams. It wasn't sort of fit for purpose, and it wasn't going to be sort of future-proofing for the remainder of the contract. We've just invested 1.8 million in a significant upgrade to our infrastructure. 2 years years ago, we introduced new telephone platforms to make sure that we could really monitor quality and quality assure all of our calls. All of our calls are recorded now for all of our interactions with clients, and we're just launching a new technology and transformation strategy as well, again around future-proofing. So there has been significant investment as well for us to develop and future-proof our services.
Thank you. Robbie Moore.
Yeah, thank you. And just building on the same narrative that's kindly been set by Chris to do with KPIs. Chris is right to point out that your contract to deliver air services, which is predominantly the 24-hour helpline and online web chat, has increased from 229 million by about 41% to 385 million. Money that is coming from the Home Office to you as an organisation to deliver services against set KPIs. But yet, reading the KPIs, very few are even being met. Why is that?
I would dispute the very few are met. So we're achieving 76% of the KPIs in 2024. However, we do need to improve. The reason they're not being met is the KPIs were set up for a system in 2019 that's vastly different to what we're seeing now. So a hugely increased number of people arriving. The telephone lines are increasingly busy, and for complex cases that we didn't have before, mental health issues, for example, are very predominant. In addition, there was at one point the use of nearly 400, just over 400 hotels, and there's still 200 hotels in place. We have teams in initial accommodation in different parts of the country that would typically see somebody as soon as they arrived, provide them with an induction, provide them with an ASF1 form, and be there in that first initial period where they could come and ask questions. A lot of that is remote with the people in 200 hotels across the country, which means they need to call in a lot more than ever envisaged in the system, and they may not find it as easy to navigate the system when they can't just drop down to our office and ask a question. So that has made some of the KPIs more challenging, and we're not in the hotels.
Okay, but this is a huge amount of taxpayers' money that is being given to you as an organisation, and one of those KPIs to do with KPI 4A and 4B, which is in relation to answering phone calls. So this is a system that's set up by that is to help those that are the most vulnerable, but yet the Home Office relaxed the KPI, right, from the phones having to be answered within a minute to every 10 minutes, but yet you have failed consistently to meet that KPI, despite it being relaxed.
It's no longer relaxed. It was relaxed for a period. It is back to a minute.
And have you met that KPI yet?
We haven't yet met that KPI yet, but our average wait time is a minute on...
A minute and 4 seconds, yeah.
On the FRC helpline, so we've substantially reduced the wait time, and that is with new systems, new telephone lines, and people on the phones.
Another KPI was for submitting change of circumstances forms for asylum seekers in time that has been missed in most months. Why is that?
That's KPI 7B. That was missed for a short period of time. It's certainly been compliant for at least the last 6 months. I think the pressure there is the volumes in the system and people that are experiencing, so as it says, a change in circumstances. We complete somebody's eligibility form, an asylum support form, with everybody when they arrive into the asylum supported system. We're obliged to do that usually within the first 5 days of arrival. That is exceptionally challenging because that was envisaged at the start of the contract that we would be co-located with those clients and people would be moved through initial accommodation. Now they're in hotels spread across the whole of the UK where we don't have a presence, and we rely very heavily on the accommodation providers to support with that and helping us to facilitate that access. And it just remains particularly challenging that we might have completed that asylum support form a year ago, maybe 18 months ago, and people's circumstances are changing because of being in that contingency accommodation for such prolonged periods of time, and that then drives, changes to people's circumstances as needing to advocate on their behalf around different accommodation needs, health requirements, and as a result of the pressures in the system, it just drives that volume somewhere else. And we have responded now. We are now compliant with that KPI, but we did have a period of time, a number of months, where it was challenging.
And does the same reasoning apply to the fact of more than 1,300 failures to provide an induction service to new arrivals within required timeframes?
We did provide inductions. We do provide inductions. Again, the KPI isn't based on the quality of the service that we provide. It's purely based on the time frame that we've done that in. And doing that within 5 days for new arrivals when they're in a hotel and might not have a telephone and where we're not co-located is exceptionally challenging. So we are inducting everybody. We are supporting everybody to complete asylum support form. And volumes are, exceptionally high. We're completing, for just the clients in initial accommodation, we're completing over 4,000 a month at the moment, but sometimes there are delays with that. But what we did do, as a result of COVID, and again trying to make sure that vital information goes to a client at the earliest stage, so people understand the system, the process, how to make contact with us. We produced a lot of additional literature, sort of 2022. It's pictorial, it's translated into the top languages, and that's distributed to all of the accommodation providers and is in each of those hotel locations.
What would you say to the likes of others that we've taken evidence from, like Refugee Action, who have described the service provided by yourselves as a system fraught with delays, or Freedom of Torture, a charity that supports asylum seekers who have been victims of torture, describing the services that you provide as extremely variable responses from Migrant Help, and sometimes cases are not even responded to for days, if not weeks. Is that something that you would agree with in terms of their analysis?
I think there have been challenges and there have been delays, and we're very open about that. Certainly from the KPI regime, we are paying service credits on a monthly basis if that performance has fallen short. I think what I would say though is there is still a lot of misinformation around the AIR contract and what we do. And if I could just very quickly touch on the customer sort of satisfaction surveys, I think we score pretty well, around 84% at the moment. We average around 1,000 responses a month, so it's a reasonable sort of benchmark. But actually, when you delve deeper into those results of why people are unhappy with the service that we provide, none of the issues are things that we can control. It's people that are frustrated with being in a hotel for prolonged periods of time and not being moved through the system. It's people that are frustrated because their payments are not going through on time. It's people that are frustrated because they haven't got a HC2 form. We can support people to log those issues and report them to where they need to go, but we don't control any of that. We're not decision makers, we are simply a reporting function, and people are frustrated, and often that's directed at Migrant Help because we are the reporting function, but we can't fix those issues. That's not the design of the contract.
And just finally, Chair, the point that I'm just wanting to make is the amount of money that is going to your organisation from the taxpayer has increased from 229 million to 385 million, a 41% increase. Despite all of those KPIs and those challenges that I've referenced, yeah. Should we be considering Migrant Help as an organisation that is fit for purpose?
I absolutely would say yes. We have a huge amount of exceptionally dedicated individuals that are working tirelessly every day to support our clients, many of whom have got lived experience. We are constantly trying to evolve and grow and develop. There's been significant investment from a technology perspective to make sure our systems are robust and future-proof. And what I would say is we're not a for-profit organisation. We don't have shareholders, and certainly up to this point in the contract, we've paid out, and we've not had the opportunity to talk about it yet, so maybe we will, 2.6 million back into the sector, supporting small grassroots organisations that are really making a difference every day to our clients, and we're working sort of really hard to do that. Right now in Birmingham, we have our annual sector conference where we've got around 150 representatives across the voluntary and community sector, where we bring them together, we're sharing best practice and we're providing those networking opportunities, and there's so much good work happening as a result of us having the contract that absolutely I would say I'm confident.
Sorry.
Can I just come in on that point? Do you accept, I hear what you're saying there, but do you accept that your service provision has been very variable? Because we've heard stories of people who, you say you're a referral service, but sometimes you're not doing that in some situations. So people who are victims of torture are referred to you and then don't get emails back for weeks. And there are cases that we've heard as we've gone around where people have found Migrant Help not to be as responsive. So I'm not saying you don't do good stuff, but do you accept that there's been variability in what you've provided, and that with these external challenges that we were speaking at the beginning, you haven't always risen to meet the challenge that you faced?
I think there definitely has been challenges. I think because we are an organisation that logs issues, that signposts, that refers, often that feedback comes from other agencies that we're not in control of. We don't have direct links in with the accommodation provider system. So if a client rings us and there's been a dispute in a property and we're asking for a welfare visit and somebody to go and support in that situation, maybe mediate, we wouldn't get feedback as to whether that's happened. And all we can do in relation to any kind of issues is advise the client what time frame they can expect a response, and if they haven't had that response, they need to come back to us, and when we can escalate that to a complaint. It's how the system works. It might take somebody 3 times to ring us before there is a resolution, but because we're not in control of that issue, it is challenging, and because we don't have sight of systems and processes, we can't give those updates, and that's why there is frustration. I think one thing that I would just sort of refer you back to specifically is on the 2nd of June, the payment rates change. So people have an Aspen card where their funds are loaded on a weekly basis. It's normally loaded in the very early hours of a Monday morning because people are living sort of week to week with that weekly support. And there was the rates were having their annual review. Something happened and people weren't paid. They were paid later in the day, but people are expecting to be able to go to the shop first thing on a Monday morning or withdraw funds to get a bus to college, and that didn't happen. And we're averaging around 4,500 calls a day. On that day alone, we spiked to over 12,000 because there's a problem in the system that people are then upset, concerned, frustrated about, and they're going to ring us and want answers. And unfortunately, again, it's not a system we're in control of. We'll log those, we'll record those, we share information with the Home Office, but we have to wait for others to fix the issue.
Your argument about the variability is it's other people's fault, not yours.
No, I'm absolutely not saying that, and I think, as Caroline said, I think we have had challenges, and we've reacted really, as robustly as we can to those. It has taken longer than we would like, and we are disappointed still not to be within the KPI and the phone lines. But that is about averaging, a minute answer time, and we were just outside that last month at 1 minute 4 seconds. So there are things that are in our control, and we're working really hard to make sure we're delivering that service.
Thanks.
So, do you think the KPIs are unrealistic then?
Some of the KPIs, I think, are unrealistic for the scheme in which we're in, and with the use of 200 hotels, for example, and not being co-located with the clients. The way the call wait time is calculated makes it more unrealistic and not representative. And I also don't think they drive the right behaviours. I think it's very helpful that they're quantitative, so there is little subject to what we say about how we deliver the service. It is clear measures in time, and that's very good. But for example, for a move-on appointment, it's contacting the client 3 times. It's not about the impact on the client or the success of the move-on. ASF is 5 days, but if they're not co-located with us, it may take longer to reach them on the phone because they're 50 miles away in a hotel that we don't have people based in. And it doesn't speak about the quality of information they're getting before then. So I think in light of how the system has changed over the past 5 years, the KPIs could be better reflective and drive better behaviour than they do at the moment.
Have you tried to renegotiate them?
We have discussed renegotiations on some, and we have recalculated some of the KPIs. It is a long, slow process, and there's a lot going on in the system, and the KPIs are calculated and the KPIs are deducted from our income. It is reducing our income, and we are living to the contractual value, and that we need to reimburse that money for not providing the service as required in some cases. So I think it's fair.
Jenny Reid.
I think what you're saying is that the KPIs and the service that you provide, the KPIs only really look at the quantitative nature of what you're doing rather than the qualitative nature, and I think you mentioned that. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to build on what you just said. So what kind of service do you believe that you're providing that the KPIs aren't recording or don't measure in any meaningful way?
Okay. The phone line doesn't recognise the nature of the calls that we receive. It was envisaged as very transactional and took over the call issue reporting lines that the accommodation providers provided for themselves, and it all comes into one place. But that's not the huge nature of the call we see anymore. About 30,000 calls on average are issue reporting in a month. We get 80 to 90,000 calls. So the more serious issues, safeguarding issues, domestic violence. And so you spend a significantly amount of time on the phone supporting somebody who is facing these issues. And that is lengthening our call times, and it has since the early days of COVID. And that's not recognised in the nature of the calls in a hard quantitative number.
So can you describe then the nature of what you feel you're providing that isn't recorded in the KPIs? You talked about the kind of the complexity of the problems, but what does that actually look like in practice, and what kind of KPI would you like to see that reflects the service that you're delivering?
We provide a more holistic service. We'll stay on the phone with somebody for as long as it takes.
And what would the output or the outcome of that be?
The outcome would be around the person's well-being and improved well-being, resolution. We have one KPI that's first-time resolution on a call, and we score extremely well on that. We score well on client satisfaction. Resolving people's issues with domestic violence, a referral, exit from the relationship that they're in, RFA to move them out of the accommodation, direct contact with the accommodation provider to help someone who is in that situation. And it may be difficult to have KPIs that are nuanced enough to understand and reflect the nature of the service that we provide, but it's of critical importance to the people we support.
So there's no KPIs around satisfaction then? Sorry, I missed what you'd said there before about satisfaction and resolution.
KPI 9 is quality of service given, and that's based on a quality assurance system that Juliet could speak in more detail about, but that's the only quality KPI.
I think one specifically that I know we have been having conversations with the Home Office colleagues about is probably KPI 8, which is around move on. So when somebody gets a decision on their asylum claim and is moving out of Home Office supported accommodation, the measure is purely about us offering a service to them within 24 hours of being notified, and that is up to 3 contact attempts. It's not about the output, and actually the output of that move on stage is really important. Actually, are those people linked in for onward housing? Are they linked in with local authority? Are they linked in with DWP around any benefit claims and so on? But there is no measure in relation to that. It is literally just, have we offered somebody a service or not?
Do you send that information to the Home Office at all?
The Home Office have, the move on information. We produce a sort of a dashboard, a pack on a monthly basis with our contract management report. So it does include all of that information. It's just that we're not measured on it.
Margaret Mullane.
Thank you. The asylum accommodation providers, when serious issues are raised on safeguarding or urgent requests for assistance, how often do you hear that hasn't been resolved and urgent assistance isn't being responded to? And bearing that in mind, where you're saying the calls are recorded, you would be able to spot a pattern, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. We don't. So we are a central reporting function, and we have a huge amount of information that the Home Office have access to, but we don't specifically report on any provider's contract or contract performance. The main route there would be around the fact that when somebody calls to report an issue, we would log that issue. Our SLA is, and it is a KPI that we have 30 minutes to have that issue recorded and sent to the provider that is responsible for fixing that issue. The key thing is for clients to understand is the next steps in the contract. If it's a boiler breakdown, what the response time is for the accommodation provider to fix that issue, and then we have to say if it hasn't been resolved in that time, then you need to ring back, and then we can escalate it to a complaint. We often hear that people say, well, I spoke to my housing officer while I was in the accommodation, but if there isn't an audit trail and a log through ourselves, then we would have to raise it as a new incident, give the accommodation providers time to fix that, before then we could sort of escalate that through into sort of a complaint mechanism. We do log formal complaints for all of the accommodation providers. So we do have those sort of stats and certainly trends around the consistent in nature of those complaints as well. So yeah, we do report on that.
So we had the accommodation providers come in to, I don't know if you saw it as well, and Clear Springs were highlighted as not performing well in certain aspects. So how do you think they respond to you? And when you're looking back at your kind of data, if there is a big kind of swell of Clear Spring accommodation complaints, what do you do about that?
So just on the complaint point, we don't personally do anything because that information goes through to the Home Office Assurance team, and it would be the Home Office Assurance team that would use that in their contract management function. It's not the design of the contract.
Would you like to?
We have no contractual authority to hold people to task. The Home Office has access to our computer systems and a large analytical team that can generate reports and see patterns of behaviour. If we are concerned because we see a vast number of issues in a certain area or certain types of issues, we absolutely will raise it with the Home Office in our CMG meeting. But we have no mechanism to go to Clear Springs and say, you need to fix this is a problem. Our route is via the Home Office.
So would you say that the Home Office's asylum team are responsive? And when you have those kind of conversations, where does that lead? Because there must be, okay, your organisation can't actually deal with that, but you must be important to the Home Office. So if you come along and say, well, Clear Springs are not performing well, the Home Office would say what? So how responsive do you think they are?
For safeguarding issues,
yes.
I find them responsive, and if we contact them and we escalate a concern that has come to us, we get a good and robust response. We also would escalate if we have a grievous concern directly by telephone to somebody at the accommodation provider and say, we're very concerned this is going on, and they are responsive in those cases too.
We have a number of platforms. So on a monthly basis, we have a joint provider board meeting that the Home Office chairs. So each of the accommodation providers and ourselves are there, and that very much is an operational platform to talk about specific issues, trends, concerns that we might have. There is a complex case call that we have on a monthly basis as well with the Home Office safeguarding team, where we can talk through very specific, as I say, safeguarding cases or complex cases that we're all supporting with as well that might be linked in with social services. So there are a number of platforms that we use, and I think what I would say just in relation to Clear Springs, they have got a lot of hotels in their area compared to some others. So I think there is more pressure in the Clear Springs estate just because of the sheer nature of where the clients are.
So you quoted 337 staff on your phone lines. Yeah. So I get it. You're speaking to very vulnerable people in very difficult situations, often might be in hotels, and they're ringing in, and the calls, you're not going to be able to speed through that call. But surely if there's that many staff, and for instance, Clear Springs, whether they've got a big portfolio or not, that's down to them, it isn't going well, wouldn't that flag up? So you're talking to the Home Office, all is not well, then what happens?
So we would raise issues through our contract management group meetings if it needs to be raised formally. So that's our monthly sort of performance review, and then there's the quarterly strategic review management board as well. So again, there is a platform within there where we talk about relationships with accommodation providers. It's often very practical in relation to the interface that we have. As Caroline says, there's no sort of contractual link directly in with the accommodation providers. So making sure that we can, there's a flow of data between them and us. We are hugely reliant on the accommodation providers. So obviously, as we've just talked about, the KPI for brand new arrivals entering into the system and needing to do that and issue an induction within the first 5 days. The data that we have for the cases that we need to complete comes from the accommodation providers. We don't have any direct link around data with the Home Office, and therefore we do need to work very closely together together and in support of each other, and I think we have that operational platform to do so.
Do you think that within the kind of model that you've got set up, that you're not responsible for pursuing or monitoring issues raised with you? Should there be a separate advice and issue reporting service separate to you?
I think the way that the contracts are structured is once that issue has been reported, it is then for Clear Springs or Serco or Mears to then report on that. They have self-reporting contracts as well. So the Home Office can certainly access our systems. They can see all of the issues that would be reported through to each of those accommodation providers on a monthly basis, and then they would be looking to make sure that their accommodation providers are assuring that data and they're responding to those issues within the timeframes. So that's how the contract is structured. Whether there may be space going forward in future iterations of the contract to do things differently, I think that's a different discussion.
Do you not think that them kind of marking their own homework and self-reporting is not ideal?
That's why they took issue reporting away from the accommodation providers. They used to have call centres and handle their own initial reporting. And it was one of the issues when the contract was let, that the volume of issues reported historically were very different to the volumes we now see. So we know there is an increase in reporting. There's also an increase in number of people within the system, so overlaid on that. But it has improved the Home Office's awareness of the number of issues and type of issues reported. So I think that was a very useful measure to have a different organisation than the accommodation providers take issue reports.
Okay, thank you.
Just so I'm clear on this, you've got a migrant who contacts you with a safeguarding issue. You flag that with the provider?
Yes.
But the Home Office is monitoring it?
The Home Office have access to our whole system. If we raise an issue, for example, the front door won't lock, it's in the database that Home Office can see, but they won't act on it. If it's a safeguarding one, it will send information to both the Home Office safeguarding and the accommodation provider safeguarding teams.
Mm-hmm. But you don't check up that has been dealt with. It's not in your contract.
No monitoring once those issues have been set.
So you flag it and then the monitoring is done. And so you have no sight as to whether things actually are acted on?
Say we have certainly depending on the nature of the case, there is the complex case call on a monthly basis. So if it is an ongoing case, then it often gets flagged and comes gets added to that agenda. Certainly from our side, from a safeguarding perspective, there's a lot of actions that we take. So depending on the nature, so somebody that comes in, often we see them through the induction and the ASF process that maybe is disputing their age. Then we have our own processes that we would follow in relation to that. We'd understand whether they'd had a full assessment at port usually. If they hadn't, then we would be doing that referral into the local authority children's services team. We'd be raising a request for assistance so the accommodation provider is aware that the client is disputing their age, and then a lot of the accommodation providers as well might also do their own social services referral on the back of that to make sure that they're linked in, and then the accommodations the Home Office safeguarding hub are also aware of those cases. So it's almost a sort of a three-pronged approach, but again we don't see exactly what the accommodation providers are doing. We often don't get updates. We do get some, but we don't often get them, but it is about each party's contractual obligations sort of kicking in.
Thank you. Belle Riviere-Addy.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask some questions about some of the issues that asylum seekers raise with the accommodation providers. But before I do, I just wanted to understand how you see your purpose, because listening to some of the answers, some of the questions my colleagues are asking, it sounds like you're primarily just a flagging service?
Some element of the work we do is a flagging service, and I think the NAO report, when it described our service, talked about that aspect of what we do and less about the other activities we do.
So how do you actually help, if that makes sense?
Yes. On the telephone lines, for example, besides the issue reporting services that we provide, We provide support for asylum seekers, for example, who have an issue with their HC1 card and are unable to access healthcare, whose children are trying to get into the school or need uniforms for school. It could be any variety of things.
You still flag them to another agency?
Those kind of things we do, but what we also do is we support clients to a huge amount of clients to complete their eligibility forms, so be able to access a Home Office support. So again, through clients that go through initial accommodation, largely the small boat arrivals, as they were completing on average around 4,000 applications. So that's a significant period of time that we spend with those individuals to allow the Home Office then to assess whether that client is eligible for full asylum support.
So that's the only thing you, I suppose, solely do by yourself in terms of supporting?
So there's a large number of those. So there's lots of clients that may be applying for Section 4 support that are not in initial accommodation. There are also cases around change of circumstances that we would complete for clients. We have an outreach service. We deliver the move-on service. That's everybody that gets a decision on their asylum claim and is then needs to leave the Home Office supported asylum world, whether that be a positive decision or a negative decision. We proactively reach out to those and we offer all of them a move-on service, working really closely with the new Home Office AMLO team to make sure we're complementing services. So
is the move-on service, I suppose, in some ways just another flagging service in that you're pointing them in the direction of other services?
It's about making sure that people understand what the next step of their journey is. So people understand the grace period. The accommodation providers would have issued a notice to quit letter so that when their support is coming to an end and effectively when they're going to be homeless. So making sure that people really understand that service and then what they need to do next for onward support and guidance and support. So whether that be housing referrals, linking them in with Job Centre Plus, work interviews. It's making sure people are ready and prepared for the next step of their journey.
We also have community liaison coordinators at the initial accommodations, and they work with local charities, they work with public libraries, community groups, churches, and they connect people to the community. They set up football teams, clubs, mother and baby activities. We've set up a library in one of the initial accommodation. I believe we're setting up a family room and another new accommodation that's opening up. So there's a lot of activities outside of the contract that we undertake as well.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to find out what the most common complaints that you receive about asylum accommodation providers are, and are there any kind of patterns, particular providers or regions or types of accommodation that get those quite specific complaints?
Yeah, I think that the most common one, interestingly for all the accommodation providers, is food provision. So people that are frustrated with food. Being in a hotel and having fully catered accommodation is challenging for anybody, and particularly when you've been there for long periods of time. Then I know that causes a huge amount of frustration. And again, one of the sort of real reasons of needing to get people through that system more quickly. And another one would be around potentially staff behaviour and then maintenance issues not being resolved and potentially delays in issuing of emergency cash payments. So that's where the accommodation provider, if the Aspen system has failed for whatever reason, maybe somebody's lost their card or it's not working or the cash machine's sort of swallowed it, then there is a route to contact us. We will support them to request emergency support, and the accommodation providers would need to issue that, and it needs to obviously be issued very quickly, usually within sort of 24 hours if somebody has no access to funds, and occasionally there are delays with that system.
And how often do you escalate unresolved cases to the Home Office, and does that typically lead to a resolution? Or do you find yourself going back again?
There's the way the system has been built, we would, as I say, an issue is raised, we have to allow the contractual time frame for resolution of that issue. So let's say it's a boiler breakdown, the AS providers are obliged to visit within 24 hours to see if they can complete a temporary fix, and they have to provide a full fix within 5 working days. So if it hasn't been fixed after that period of time, then we can raise that to a complaint, and the accommodation providers have a 5-day time time frame to acknowledge the complaint and respond to that. If it hasn't been done in that time, then the system automatically on day 6 flags an escalation through to the Home Office complaints team. So they would be cited at that point on anything that goes above and beyond that SLA.
And then what happens then? Because I suppose that would be quite a serious case where obviously they're not meeting their contractual obligations again and again. How does that then get resolved?
So that would be for the Home Office assurance teams and the service delivery teams that manage and support each accommodation provider that would pick that up as part of their monthly assurance checks and to raise that as part of that contract management.
So even if it's been flagged with you a couple of times, it's still kind of left with the Home Office?
We don't, as Caroline says, we don't have any sort of authority or any control over the accommodation providers. We just make sure that there's an impartial organisation that issues can be reported to, and then it's for the Home Office to manage.
And do you see any sort of evidence of learning and improvement by accommodation providers or indeed the Home Office in response to the issues that you raise most often?
Yeah, as I say, I certainly think through the networks and the partnerships that we have, then we do work really closely together to identify those gaps. As Caroline says, we've got a small but perfectly formed team of community liaison coordinators that are doing a huge amount of work on a sort of daily, weekly, monthly basis to fill gaps. And we work really closely. You know, quite a lot of the accommodation providers have partnership managers in their regions, and we work really closely to make sure that we are filling those gaps. It was really challenging, certainly winter months when new hotels are being stood up in areas where maybe there hasn't got, areas that haven't got the infrastructure that certain other local authority areas have. And a lot of the clients that would newly arrive on small boats have very limited sort of goods and clothing. Just making sure that people have access to warm clothes and decent shoes and that there's meaningful activity in areas and opportunities to access sort of English language skills to help with the community and cohesion piece, and actually we work really closely together around a lot of that sort of added value in certain areas.
Okay. And just lastly, Serco actually said to this committee in written evidence that Migrant Help and providers having them as a go-between is some of the issue is one of the reasons why some leads to miscommunications and inefficiencies, and they suggested that it might actually be easier in terms of communication to get some of these issues resolved, particularly in case of maintenance and repairs, if they were able to, the service users were able to go directly to those that were doing that. Do you agree?
I disagree. The system worked that way, and the Home Office found that it wasn't very effective, and so changed it. I am aware that Serco did submit a bid for the air contract and were interested in delivering the service but weren't able to deliver both services. There is a reason why it's set up, and there is one point of contact, and I think our clients do find it easier to be able to contact us and raise any issue with us, and they have a lot of faith that we will pass the issue on, that we'll tell them the right place to go, we'll help them with their application forms, they can come into our office if they're in the IA and get some help. And I don't think they necessarily have the confidence with the people who are accommodating them. They're also afraid about what will happen to their asylum claim, and we hear that when people call up the helpline and say, I don't know if I can raise a complaint, will it affect my claim? And we spend time reassuring them and encouraging them to raise a complaint, and I think that isn't always there if it's somebody they see day to day and don't see as a friend and an ally.
Has anybody ever raised concerns about, I suppose, perhaps your name and the way in which you operate? You're called Migrant Help, and some people might think that you were a friendly, cuddly NGO type organisation, but you're actually contracted by the Home Office. Has anybody ever raised that it might be slightly misleading?
We have had some criticism for our name. I think we are also a friendly, cuddly contract provider, and we try and look and do other things that we can. So we run a youth welfare officer programme through third-party charities that we fund wholly, that's based in hotels. There's 7 locations around the UK that are supporting the mental health of 18 to 25-year-old men in the asylum system, and that's with the surpluses of our contracts. We run a community grants programme of up to £3,000 to help run community hubs, connecting the sector events we hold quarterly, and we talk about subjects like partnerships and running lived experience advisory panels. We do less of the cuddly stuff, but we certainly do the cuddly stuff, and that is one of the points of operating the contract, is to help us fund the more supportive cuddly stuff.
And we are supporting a lot of amazing organisations that are working in communities every day to support our clients, and that's what it's about. When we know that we're not the experts in everything, but we think we are in a really privileged position to deliver the contract, and we want to use those funds wisely. We've got our grant funds. We're up to £10,000 that we're issuing to organisations on a really regular basis, and one that we've just working with is we've just issued £10,000 at the end of last year to an organisation in the West Midlands, and actually their work is all around bringing communities together through food. It's a culture kitchen, and it's an amazing charity, and it's operating term time, and we've managed to fund that for 39 weeks of the year, and it's those kind of projects that I think we're able to really support, because we can't be everywhere, we can't do everything, and we're absolutely not the experts at doing it either. It's those smaller charities that really understand their communities and where those gaps are.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Sean Davis.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just refer to my interest of Honorary Vice President of the Local Government Association for this purpose. Just going back a step around the £338 million value of the contract, how much of that is management fees?
I'll need to come back to you on the split.
Thank you. And just going back to what you just said around the grant giving and so forth, does that come from the contract value, or does that come from kind of a corporate social responsibility operation of the charity? So in other words, is the Home Office in effect paying for those things, that the grants that you're giving?
It's a mix, so we do some fundraising, and there are some small surpluses on the contract. It was 3.8% surplus over the life of the contract up until August 2024.
Okay, so it's effectively coming from the Home Office grant or contract amount that you're giving, but you're branding it as grants to local community groups. Is that right?
The total value was 4.4 million, so exceeded the value of the surplus on the contract.
Just moving and thinking about the future now, how do you think it can be improved from your perspective as a provider in this space?
Yeah, I think one thing very practically at the moment is around the journey of an asylum seeker, certainly at the start. I think the model, as was sort of conceived in 2019, is the right model. I think people need to go through sort of an initial accommodation type environment, so whether that be the established initial accommodation centres around the country, or whether that's sort of more medium or large accommodation, but a really focused effort for when those individuals arrive, where we can deliver our services. Health partners can be on site to really support and health screen individuals. There can be real focus if it's families around children and child immunisations. There'll be a real opportunity to support and assess vulnerabilities and any safeguarding risks. And I think that model works really well in lots of parts of the country. It's unfortunately very limited at the moment because the capacity in those locations is about 2,500 beds, I believe. But I think if we can get to that stage where individuals are going through that type of setting for a very time-limited period, so 6-8 weeks ideally, and then moving on into more community properties where people can integrate, children can go to schools, people can be registered with GPs, but that their immediate needs and assessment is made through that route. I think I would really strongly advocate for that. I think people have a much better journey, and we are able to do a huge amount more around education and support for individuals through that model.
Just to summarise that, effectively a multi-agency approach which those agencies wrap around the support for those individuals in their localities as they come in for an intense period of time. You suggested 8 weeks, and then to mainstream into existing provision. Is that fair to say?
That was the model, and that is absolutely evident in pockets of the UK now where there is a formal initial accommodation centre. It's just because of the numbers in the system and most people going through hotels, people don't go through that process now.
Are there areas of your work that you would like to see expanded? For example, are there areas of gaps that you think you should be able to step into?
Interestingly, one of the gaps is move on, but I think the AMLOs are doing an excellent job with that, so I wouldn't recommend that we would move into that area of work. I think there is a need for support with welfare on clients while they're in the system and dispersed within the system. So in the model that Juliet talked about, we're physically present in the IAs and able to support, assuming that hotels are done away and people are dispersed into the communities. More support around the welfare, so how the NGOs in the communities could link, in addition to the processing stuff that was talked about that we do, that is absolutely necessary to happen. I think there is community support that can happen on top of that, and I think we, along with other NGOs, could provide that, but that doesn't eliminate the need for the processing support that also happens.
Are there areas of your activity, given the significant growth in demand, that you feel if it was narrowed or removed altogether, you would provide overall a better service?
I think the move on service, if that was removed, it's very light touch what we do, and if the AMLOs pick up that piece of it, it's a good area to make some savings, and that would take time away that we're spending on that we could spend on other things.
Thank you. And just, you've heard quite a bit about the KPIs. I've heard, I think the committee's heard as well, that there's almost a bizarre incentive in the system that if you got people through, moved people through very quickly on a phone call, regardless of the quality of advice that you gave, your KPIs would be probably better than they are at the moment. And there's a tension there. Is there other thing, either linked to KPIs or any other area of the contract that you feel needs fundamental change in order to incentivise better performance from yourself?
I think the induction in the first 5 days is a mistake. I think when somebody arrives in this system, it's an awful time for them. They've gone through significant trauma. They're introduced to a new system and a foreign culture and a language they may not understand. And they enter an IA and they're inducted by the accommodation provider. And then they're inducted by us. And it's so much information that's going to be about their next few years, and that must be incredibly daunting. It's one of the reasons why, at our own expense, we put together a booklet in multiple languages so they can go away and look at that booklet on the induction and say, okay, I can't remember what we were supposed to do, but we still get calls back to the helpline saying, I can't remember what you told me, or I'm not sure how to do this. I think that would be more appropriate, really light touch induction at first, and give somebody a little bit of time to settle and then provide that information to them would be incredibly helpful.
Okay. And just in terms of the Home Office's role in regards to its approach around the accommodation, any views in terms of what should change, what could be better in that respect?
I think some of the large site approaches haven't been effective. And when Alex Fraser was here, he spoke about large sites might be suitable for a very short term initially, but not in the long term, and we agree with that. I think it is very difficult to support asylum seekers outside the community on a large site like that, and there's very little integration. So that's something I agree with and would endorse. I think there was a lot of learning, however, from Napier Barracks and what happened there, and we were involved in what the people on site needed and how they could improve that, and adapting that into those middle-sized sites like student accommodation would be really helpful. So learning from what has happened already.
Do you think that there's a tension here, given the increasing scale and the longevity of this crisis that we're seeing with asylum, that effectively you're a part of the answer, but you shouldn't be the centrepiece of it, costing taxpayers £338 million, that money would be better used localising services down, potentially linking into local government and in other sectors, other organisations making their business as usual, and effectively you become what you I think was intended, an advice and advocacy service for these very, very vulnerable people.
Yeah. I think there's an element of that, and it's hard to split up the scale of that funds and what it's funding in terms of increased volumes and what it's funding in terms of increased need created by the situation. And that might be hard to disconnect. However, I think it is appropriate that additional funding is directed towards NGOs to support clients who have welfare needs, who have special needs, people like Freedom from Torture who have real specialist skills. And it's one of the reasons why we will refer it to someone else who can do a piece of it better.
And just finally from me, because we hear from local governments, from local NHS partnership organisations, we hear from GPs that there is not enough resource for them. So when you're referring people in and you're flagging people in, the money effectively stops at that point. Is there not an argument that some of this money should be broken up and diverted to the front line rather than in an organisation which is effectively a call centre with, I don't know, you've covered it well, with some outreach work as well?
I understand the argument, and I think some of it could be diverted, but it's the activities that we undertake still need to be undertaken, so there needs to be the funding, regardless of who does it, to do those activities, and we can't fall short and miss out the opportunity for those things to happen.
Would you, I don't know if I said, but finally, would you agree that with the Minister then, that effectively you've got a role to provide support, but a much more localised approach to this would be better for everyone concerned?
For some of the support.
Which parts would you say would not apply? Would not be able to be covered in that assertion?
I think that a national helpline is important because clients move all over the country, and so they'll lose continuity of service. That's absolutely critical. I think the national service in the initial accommodation is important because it delivers consistency in ASF1 forms, COC forms, so what's submitted to the Home Office to process would slow down if the quality wasn't monitored and controlled in that way. So I think that is particularly useful as well.
I think local authorities play a vital role though, and they are the experts in their areas. So when it comes to, certainly for the accommodation providers, to procuring new accommodation, where that accommodation needs to be, I think a lot of the time, and I think it's just a consequence of the system, and probably often not trying to compete with different sectors. That accommodation might be procured in an area where potentially there's no social housing, and then if somebody gets a decision on their asylum claim and it's a family, then do they need to be uprooted then, because there is no social housing in that area to support that individual going forward? Actually, should that be more joined up? Should there be consideration around that? So I think certainly there's absolutely roles to play for local authorities. I think they are the experts in their areas, but I think certainly some of the elements that we deliver needs to have that consistent approach.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else you want to add before we conclude?
I would just welcome any of you to come and visit the call centre and visit the IA. I think it's really helpful to see it in context.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. That concludes this session. Thank you for your answers. And I know it's been a longer session, I think, any of us envisaged, but you can see that we've still got lots of things we want to make sure we put in our report. So I appreciate very much you being here and giving us your time. And I will conclude with order.